Hello, this is Brad or Brad Wild. We are in San Diego, which is Kilo Sierra Alpha November, and we're taking a short but interesting flight, and you'll see why in a minute, over to Palm Springs. Not very long, I think under an hour. Palm Springs, Kilo Papa Sierra Papa, and we're flying the Saab 340A. From X-Aviation. This is the most recent version. One of my favorite airplanes to fly. So the reason I said interesting is a couple things I want to show you. Here we are in San Diego. Here's Palm Springs. And I've put in a route, and there really isn't a commercial flight that runs between these two airports, so I had to kind of come up with my own using a SID and a star of my own choosing. But we'll take off to the west on runway 27, circle on around, and you'll see how that works in a minute, and then on into San Diego. Pick the right one here. All right, here's our SID. So taking off here from runway 27, after we get the wheels folded up, we'll turn slightly to the right to 278 degrees, and then 19 miles from Pogi, or Papa Golf Yankee, we'll turn to 123 degrees, and when we get to the 80-degree radial into Pogi, we'll then begin our lateral navigation and let it take over from there and actually fly over Pogi. Now let me find this other map that I made. So here's Pogi, and here's our 19 miles DME. So here's the runway. We'll take off and then head in this direction and then finally make our turn. Why are we doing all of this? Well, we've got an airport here, a naval air base. So we're trying to avoid traffic coming off of those runways. So we'll kind of skirt around it. And if you look at the SID, you can see what we're doing. That airport's kind of in here somewhere. So that's slightly interesting. Have to do a couple of extra things to honor that. Then when we get towards Palm Springs, we'll be using the S Bono, as in Sonny and Bono, or Sonny Bono, Sonny and Cher, if any of you remember the 70s. So we'll be flying over Thermal, VOR, and then pick up the S Bono waypoint. And then it gets interesting. We have this very unusual approach that comes on around, kind of circles around to the north east, and finally on into 13 right. So we have to begin this descent, and it's very carefully mapped out so that you don't run into any mountains. And as we get closer, I'll show you how I figured out how we're going to do that. So I think that's the planning for now. I'm going to go ahead and start up the airplane. It's cold and dark. You can skip that part if you want. I'll put some times in the description, but I'm using my own checklist that I've devised over many flights. But you're welcome to watch. So we'll get some external power. We'll remove all the chocks and what have you. So we've got our power available. It's just a matter now of getting on our batteries. External power is on. Not sure why we reset these, but you do it once before and once after the engines are started. Boot indicator. And turn the beacon on. Let folks know we're busy in the cabin. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on the cabin lights. There's a little oxygen knob over here, so we'll pull that up. And we want these to ground idle. Our power levers. And we are ready to start. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll start with our right engine. Put our condition lever to start. And we're beginning to see some activity there. And we'll hear a click and see all the lights come back on. And we can start our left engine. Again, you can skip all this. There's plenty of videos of people starting this airplane from cold and dark. And what we're doing is we're watching our temperature here. It's going to climb up into the 600s and then drop back down. And that's when you see the lights come back on and we can start our other engine. So put that condition lever up. Again, we see the lights dim or disappear while all the power is directed to that engine. We see it start to spin. And again, we're watching these temperatures. They're starting to come up. While we're waiting for that, we'll set our right generator on and then reset. And our bleed valve on the right. And we can dismiss our external power now. Now reset our left generator to on. Bleed valve. Arm our lights. Emergency lights. Auto coursing on while we're here. Standby pitot. And then our main switch here, which means we can have some panel light. So we see that the engines are stable. Let's go ahead and turn on our radios. So we can get our Garmin programmed. Here's, have to actually turn it on. I wish there was a way that I could power up the radios and program it without starting the engines. maybe someone can tell me how to do that on this aircraft. I do it in the JAR 320 all the time. But I guess you really don't push back this aircraft. And these should go to, what's the setting here? What's it called? Max. But I'm going to wait until we're a little bit closer, having our radios programmed. Alright, engines are running. Time to program our Garmin. Now I've done a little bit of programming ahead of time. Let me just show you where I did that. Over here, I wrote a little application at X-Plane Tools, which allows me to drop in my flight plan, which I scraped from Sky Vector. And just to show you, what that does. I've already got it saved to the disk, so I don't want to redo that. So you select the source and you go ahead and convert it, and you can see the .fms file that it creates. So I have simply saved that to my disk, and I'll pull that up now into the Garmin. Select one of these here and then scroll down to find my KSAN to KSPS, and here we go. So enter, go over, and I can see that the flight plan has been put in. I also have put in the VOR for PGY, Papa Golf Yankee. Remember, I have to use that for my departure. So right now we are, if you look, whoops, that's not helpful. Right now we're showing about 13 miles. So we're going to be flying out 19 miles before we make our turn. And I'm going to go ahead and dial in that our heading here. We want that to be 278. So when we take off, I can set that. We want this on V-lock for right now. Alright, we're ready to taxi out to runway 27. Okay, we're ready to taxi. Again, you can skip this if you like. I put my condition levers to max. Got a notch of flaps here, a little bit of power to get the aircraft rolling. And I put on my taxi light. I suppose I don't need my wing light. No icing conditions to check right now. I think I'll put on my nav lights. So we're going to be headed north here. Release the brake. Lights here. Nice shadows on the instrument panel there. little more power. Yeah, my frame rates are borderline here. Usually I like to keep them above 20, but by the way, this is a iMac 2013 with 16 gig of RAM. Processor's the i7, and I've got 4 gigs of VRAM. I'm using SkyMax Pro version 3 for my clouds. And once we get rid of all of this ground scenery, my frame rates will come up, but this should be enough to get us off the ground. So just to review, after we take off, we're going to be setting our autopilot and heading to 27.8, flying for 19 miles DME from the VOR Papa Golf Yankee, and then turning to the southeast 123 until we intercept the 80-degree radial off of our VOR, and then we'll begin our GPS, our L navigation to Palm Springs. Alright, here we are at the end of runway 27. Just need to do a few more things before we take off. I just point out a few naval aircraft back here, aircraft carriers. Again, big naval base in San Diego. So let's start down on our console. We're going to set our CTOT, which will automatically move our throttles to whatever we set this at. I've got it set at 90%. So when we hit 64% of power, it'll automatically just move the power to this setting. Got a notch of flaps here. And while I'm down here, I've got this set for V-lock, which is what I need for my initial flight. I'm going to set my climb to 141, so when I engage the autopilot, it will automatically climb to a speed of 141, and you set this on your EDAI. I'm gonna make sure that my heading is set, because I'm going to be using that heading first. We won't be going to LNAV for a while. And my initial altitude 7,000 feet. And I do not need this second VOR needle. And I want to make sure I've got all the necessary lighting. And I have turned off my ground operations and put on my takeoff inhibit switch so I don't get any spurious messages. And we've been told we can line up and wait. A little power here. So right after takeoff, after we get the gear folded up, we'll engage our autopilot and hold a heading of 278 until we are 19 miles DME from that VOR PGY. And notice the torque now at 90%. We will rotate about 110. Gear up. And autopilot on. Hold that for a second. We can turn off our CTOT. Taxi light off. Auto Corson off. And we've turned to approximately 278. See the Naval Air Force Base, or Naval Air Base. I'm just slightly off the runway heading. And just a little bit more power here. We want our temperature to be about 850. And next we're just watching for that DME of 19. We're only 16 now, so I'm going to roll the heading to 123. Come back a little bit. And we can put our prop sync switch on, and flaps up. So we're climbing at 141 knots, and we're coming up on 19. So want this knob here. And we'll begin our turn at 19. 123. Out over the nose from the cockpit. That's what the passengers are seeing, at least one of them. Here's our airport back here. Coming up on 7,000. These SkyMax clouds look great from underneath. Look much better from underneath than they do on top. So we're at 7,000. We were told to expect our cruise altitude 10 minutes after departure, but we've just been given the go-ahead. So crank this up to 15 and begin our climb. Let's make it 161. I've only had this SkyMax program or plug-in for a few weeks, but I'm loving it. Very realistic way the clouds twist and turn, rotate. And now we are in the clouds. Yeah, passengers can't see much. Straight out. Looking back, still climbing through our clouds. So next we want to watch for our interception of the 180 radial. So I've got this set again to the VOR, 109.8. And when this needle swings across and lines up, then we can begin our lateral navigation and our GPS using our Garmin. Coming up on our 80 radial, but we've just passed the 10,000 foot mark. Flip off the lights. And I'm going to say we're at that radial, so I'm going to put this on GPS, make sure that we're activated here, and click on our nav button as we begin to turn towards PGY. You can pull up the map here by holding down the clear button for a few seconds and direct to Papa Golf Yankee. Getting above our clouds here. From the cockpit back, coming back over San Diego. See the port here. And I think that's Coronado Island, where our naval air station is. You can drive out there. It's a beautiful facility. Alright, we're almost to our cruise altitude. It's flashing on our ADI. And we are well along our route here, coming up on the waypoint prows. Let's let our flight attendants move around. And then we can set our condition levers. Set them back to 1300. Come back a little bit on our power. And we'll be lucky to see somewhere between 240, 250 knots ground speed. zoom out for yucks. So here I'm at 150 miles. So again, we'll cover this pretty quickly. I think the thing that takes the longest is that approach, that circular approach into runway 13 right. So we're coming up on our turn here. So more of the same, clouds and desert. Coming up on a VOR, one of our waypoints, Juliet Lima, India. Zoom in a little bit. I like the SkyMax cirrus clouds. And the cumulus look a little cottony, but still very pleased with SkyMax and what it's doing. So our next waypoint after JLI will be thermal. So as we come up on thermal, Tango Romeo Mike, VOR, things are going to start to get interesting because we're beginning our star. So here's our star. We're going to be crossing thermo and we're going to be going to S Bono, and we want to check the distance. And if we look over at our flight plan, we've got a distance of 16 miles to make that descent from our cruise altitude of 15 down to 9. Well, here I'm just going to dial in 9. But we want to figure out our rate of descent. So we're going to use a little tool that I put together at X-Plane Tools. So we want to figure our vertical speed. We're at 15,000. We're headed to 9,000. And we'll probably be averaging about 230 and then down to maybe 200. And 16 miles to do that. So we're going to be between 1,400 and 1,300, 1,200 feet per minute. So I'll probably just round that out to 1,300. One thing we need to take a look at after we cross S Bono and we'll begin our circular descent. I want to determine our rate of descent from S Bono to Wasak. So it's from 9,000 feet to 6,000 feet. You can see that down here. And it's a distance of about 30 miles. And then we drop in 10 miles down to Jesso at 2,900. So I want to figure out those rates of descent as well. So cruise altitude of 9,000 down to 6,000 and probably in the 200 range. And we've got 30 miles to do that. So 333, so a very slow descent. And then after that, we are going from 6,000 to 2,900, and we'll probably be about 160 by then, and we've got 10 miles to do that. So we're going to be at 827 or thereabouts. So these are rough numbers because you can't get that exact in this aircraft. Back to our flight. Pull up the menu or the map here. Zoom in a little bit. So we've got 2 minutes. So I want to click on my vertical speed here, and on my ADI will dial in 1,300 to 1,400 feet per minute. I would be rather be a little ahead of the game. And the other thing we need to do is determine what our approach is going to be. So right after we cross over thermo, begin our descent, we'll pick an approach. By the way, I'm using X airports. Well, this is not really that accurate because we're going to be coming around this direction over Yucca Valley and Marengo Valley. And you'll see that plotted out once I set our approach. So we're coming up on thermo. And we want everybody to have a seat. So we begin our descent. Click our vertical speed and watch the corner of our ADI. And we'll see how we do with 1,500, or I'm sorry, 1,300, and we'll come back on our throttles. Watch our speed here. And then let's pick our procedure. We're going to be using the GPS 13 right Y, Yankee. And we'll use the Bono. I get those mixed up. Initial approach fix. And I'm going to just go ahead and activate that. And let's take a look at our map. And it has plotted it in very nicely. We look over at X airports. We're here, so we'll be picking up Bono and circling on around into Palm Springs. The airport's really over here. I like X-plane in the early morning or late evening. Really nice colors, especially with SkyMax. So we've got 2 minutes to go. And looks like we're probably should increase our descent a little bit, maybe 1,500, because I've been going a little bit faster than I put into our calculator. but we'll have plenty of time to get down to altitude, as you saw. We've got 30 miles. Pilot's view out the right or left window. Coming up on 10,000, let's get our landing lights on. Watching our speed. So we're going to get to our target right on time. Maybe a little ahead of time, but that's fine. And we'll begin our turn here. Headed towards Yagas. Altitude is showing here, so I'm going to dial in our next target, which is 6,000. Click our vertical speed. And just have to watch our speed here. Bump up our throttle a little bit. That rapid descent, I could pull back on the power. The clouds are just beautiful. I just love how they rotate. Of course, it's a setting that you can make in SkyMax. So, just want to avoid the mountains. Always a good thing when you're flying. So at Yargus we want to be at 8,000. I'm sorry, I think it's Cusick. Let's take a look at our map. So we want to be at 8,000 at Cusick, so we're okay. Again, it's not something that's as accurate as if we were flying the JAR A320 where we could put all those altitudes in the FMS. It's hard to get this get to 300 here. There we go. Our airport, well, I don't know where our airport is actually. Yeah, here's it's out here. This is Palm Springs. So we're going to circle on around just right alongside these foothills. LA's out in this direction. So 8,000 for Cruxit. So we're just slightly ahead of schedule. Hopley, I think it's 7,500. Again, our target is 6,000. look at our ex-airports. We're going to be over Yucca Valley shortly. Hopley's 7,500, so we're slightly ahead of schedule, but hopefully it'll even out in the end. Kind of dark in here. So we'll be coming down into this valley and on around. And again, at Wasatch, we want to be at 6,000. Looking out to the east. Our passenger has their shade down again. Alright, enough messing with that. Again, looking out over the nose. And at Yokol, we want to be at 7,000, so again, we're slightly ahead of time, but then there's a bit of a drop here down to Wasatch. So we may need to pick up a little more of a descent rate. So we are parallel to the runway. Of course, going the opposite direction. So we'll be just traveling right through here. No ILS approach into Palm Springs because of the mountains. You'd have to have a localizer that made a curve. So far, I don't think they've done that. Hence the RNAV and this kind of interesting approach. So a minute and a half to get to 3,000. And then remember, we're going to drop a little bit faster, probably around 800 or 900, depending on how fast I can dial things in. And it will be visual approach in the end. Alright, let's get ready to begin that more rapid descent. Dial in 2900. And watching the ADI. 900 now. Let's take a look at X airports coming around the bend here over Marengo Valley. Here's Big Bear, big ski area. So again, we want to be to 2900 here. You can see the beacon, airport beacon here. And this is 10 that runs all the way to Phoenix from LA. By the way, there's a cable car that you can take up to the top of this mountain. I think it's about 10,000 feet. Alright, let's pay attention here. Let's increase our descent just a hair. I'm a little fast on my speed here. That's probably what caused the issue. I wasn't paying close enough attention, so So we're just going to take this down to pattern altitude, which is 1,500 feet. So we'll be close. And here is the runway. And we can begin prepping things. Get our CTOT back on in case we need to go around. Auto Corsin. Turn off our prop sync. Notch your flaps. We want this runway here. And our VASI lights are showing we're on target. Go ahead and disconnect our autopilot. Probably need a little more power here. Gear down. I hate to take my eye off the ball, but just check our flaps. Yep. So we want to keep red over white. back a little bit on our approach speed. Taxi lights on. Using the free scenery available on xplane.org. Get lined up here. Fly this right down to the ground. And retard. Brakes. We're going to be going over to corporate here. Of course, we'll stop and ask ATC for clearance to the ramp. And while we're waiting, we can put up our flaps. And we could turn off our strobes and our landing lights. And on over to the ramp. I'm going to be crossing an active runway, 13 left. I'm going to mess this up. Alright, that completes our flight from San Diego to Palm Springs.